Welcome to the Prime Property Finance Podcast with Gareth Morgan and Mark Watts. This unique podcast will dive deep into all areas of property investing finance, going behind the scenes with property professionals, investors and clients. Between us, we have 35 plus years experience in property finance. The podcast has been launched to share knowledge, mindset requirements and experiences of successful investors and professionals. We aim to simplify many of the complicated areas of finance and investing and provide valuable and easy to implement tips. Keep an eye out for our new longer episodes every Tuesday and our shorter ones every Friday.
Article 4 is one of the most misunderstood planning rules in property investing. Some investors panic and avoid entire cities because of it. Others ignore it completely and assume it won't affect them. And we've seen both ends of the spectrum, and it's cost people serious money. In this episode, I'm going to explain what Article 4 actually is, how it affects HMO investing, and where investors get caught out, and how to assess whether the deal still works in an Article 4 area. Let's jump in. In this episode, I'm going to take you through a 9-step journey to understand what is Article 4 and how it impacts you and the things you should consider if you are going to invest in HMOs specifically, and whether you need planning permission or not, and how that affects licensing and many other things. So let's jump into it. So part 1, what Article 4 actually is. So just to be super clear, Article 4 directions are issued by local councils to remove permitted development rights. So we're talking specifically about England here. So most properties, you can change a property from a C3 dwelling. So a normal home is the home that you and I live in would be classed as C3. So that's a residential home. And outside of Article 4 in England, you can convert the property to a small HMO, which would be C4, for between 3 and 6 occupants. And that can be done without full planning application. Inside an Article 4 area, they remove the automatic right to be able to convert a property, a single dwelling, from a C3 into a C4. And that means you must apply for full planning permission to convert it from C3 to C4. In Wales, the whole of Wales is effectively Article 4. If you want to convert the property from C3 to C4, then you need to convert it. So for the purpose of this episode, I'm going to focus more on England, where permitted development right exists. But in general terms, we will talk about, and that will cover the whole of England and Wales. So I guess just the key point here is to understand that Article 4 does not ban HMOs. It just removes its automatic permission, and it becomes a planning decision. Okay, so what is Article 4? On to part 2, and why did councils introduce it? So just to understand the reasoning behind why this came into force and a little bit of the thought process so that you can understand the reasoning behind it. So basically, in certain areas of mainly city centres, there's been a high concentration of HMOs, and there's been a concern amongst the community and due to the increase in parking pressures, noise complaints, antisocial behaviour, strain on infrastructure like traffic and things like that. And so because of all of these items that have caused concerns, there's been lots of complaints to the local authority. And so to stop the people being able to do this easily, this is where, and most of these areas you'll find around student areas mainly, is when they were first brought in. So they limited it. So they brought in Article 4. They limited the ability to just convert any house into a HMO without planning permission. And that's extended now into different busier parts of cities and towns. So just, Article 4 isn't just a completely random made up thing. It's strategic from the council to limit the types of houses in a certain location. So part 3, where do investors usually get caught out on this? So the common mistakes that we see is that people assume an existing HMO use is lawful. Just because somebody has a HMO already, it doesn't confirm that it's actually lawful use. So anyone could just put some people in a house and not have a license and not have planning for it. And so if you assume that because it's currently being used as a HMO, that's lawful, then could turn out to be a big mistake. You need to understand whether planning was granted prior to Article 4 or not, and because that will depend, again, on its planning permission and its use class. Now, you can do this via searching the planning portals for the address of the property in that local authority. Another one, a common mistake that we see is that people confuse licensing with planning permission. Now, these are two very different things. So planning permission is the local authority giving you permission that the property can be used for that type of use, so the C4 usage. However, licensing is a separate department within the local authority, usually environmental health, which means that this property has a license for people to be able to share that property. So does it have the minimum space standards in terms of units? Does it have fire doors? Does it need a fire alarm? Correct number of amenities and space, etc. So other mistakes that people have done that we've noticed is people buy in properties that are sort of mid-conversion, again, that haven't had permission, and also just assuming that lenders won't care because they do. So yeah, the key point on this one is, on the ones that people get caught out on are confusing licensing with planning permission and just assuming that because something is already a HMO, that it is lawfully used for that reason. Okay, so step 4 is about lawful use and existing HMOs. So if a property was already operating as a C4 HMO before Article 4 came in, then it may have lawful existing use, but this must be evidence. So this is something called grandfather rights. Now there's a number of ways. So if the property's been used as a HMO for 20 years and you can evidence that, then you can potentially go to the local authority and ask for something called a certificate of lawful use, certificate of lawfulness. However, I'm hearing that it's becoming increasingly difficult to prove it because I think the minimum time frame is 10 years. You can, in some instances, apply for it in less than 10 years, but you usually need to go back 10 years. And I understand that some planning departments are being very particular about being able to evidence that. You'd need all of the tenancy agreements, all of the utility bills and things for every month for the last 10 years. And that, for people who don't hold good records, that can be quite difficult. And without proof of all of that, you may be able to sell, you may struggle to sell a property, you may struggle to refinance. And, if someone was looking to buy the property, then that could raise red flags. So if it was already a C4, then great. If it's a HMO currently, and it's been less than 10 years and it doesn't have evidence of lawful use and it doesn't have planning, then within the last 10 years, and you can look at the planning portal and see, and if not, then potentially that property is being used without the correct planning permission in place. Okay, so step 5. So how does Article 4 affect finance? So the lender's considerations here, again, we're reverting back to planning permission. Is the planning permission in place? Is it being used under its current lawful use? Because if there's been no change in planning permission, then that could be a C3 still. There is a risk of enforcement, and fines can be pretty hefty if you use a property without the correct permission and also without the license. The fines can be £20,000 if you rent the property without the license and getting a ban from being a landlord and various things, being a director of a property company. So there's lots of potential penalties. So that's definitely something that you need to consider. Obviously, that would affect the valuation and potentially your exit and your ability to liquidate the property should you need to release that property and release cash from that asset. So in some cases, lenders restrict HMO lending in heavy Article 4 areas. They may have a restriction about how many properties they will lend to against that area. If there's an over-reliance, they might think there's an issue with forward selling, and therefore valuers may discount the value if the concentration is high. So ultimately, if there's a planning risk, then lenders will view that as a risk as well. Okay, how does it impact on deal numbers? So Article 4 can affect time, because obviously if you do need to get planning, then there could be delays in that. And everyone knows the planning process is getting more difficult and taking longer and longer to get things through. Costs, planning application fees, consultants, you may need to do various tests. Obviously, there's a cost potentially on the refurbishment that may be higher level of spec that you need to put into the property. There's a risk of refusal, and also there is the yield assumptions based on comparable evidence and the restrictions, and that can be positive and negative. So you need to see that depending on the location that you're investing in, and the exit strategy. You know, you may have restricted options, or you may have more options. And again, this is all, whenever it comes to valuation and exits, it is very location specific. So it could be in one area of a city, it could be really strong, but in another area of the city, it could be really poor due to the tenant demand, marketability, demand for, you know, that type of property in that type of location. So the key point that you need to consider when you're looking at your numbers, you know, with all of these additional costs and times and delays and risks, is the cost of buying the property subject to planning approval versus buying it with it already secured, or buying it without planning or subject to, is a lot more of a risky strategy. You may want to do, if you have to get the deal done, you may be able to do a pre-app with the local authority to get a quick understanding. But again, that's not quick in all cases. So there are risks that you need to face and things that you need to consider. Point 7 is, you know, when does Article 4 not become a deal killer? So getting the balance right is important. The good thing about Article 4 is that it can limit supply, in which case that increases barriers to entry from an investor perspective. And for those compliant HMOs who have planning and the right license in place, and obviously if they're a good quality product, then that will protect the long-term rental demand. And so actually having Article 4 in place, if you're already a landlord in that location, then you can improve, it will improve the value of those properties. So like I said earlier, having Article 4 can actually be a good thing for those people wanting to invest, knowing what they're getting themselves into, already investing in those areas, because it will put off other people from getting involved in it. So it's definitely not to be scared of. It's just understanding what you're getting yourself into. With all of these things, it's all about getting advice. Get advice from your local authority, one from a planning perspective and two from a licensing perspective. They are two different things. What we have also seen recently is that when in the past, when you applied for a license, there isn't a need to get planning permission. However, we've seen more recently when people are applying, it's asking for confirmation that the property has planning permission. So now it seems that two departments of the council are connecting with each other to find that out. So it is becoming more and more important that you get this right. So step 8 is about due diligence and understanding the things that you need to consider as part of the due diligence process. So things that we should be looking out for. One, is the property in an Article 4 area? And that's pretty easy to find based on, if you go on the local authority's website, most of it is pretty mapped out. But if not, you can just get in touch with them and they'll be able to share that with you. When did Article 4 come into force? And be very careful on this, because an area wasn't in Article 4 last year. That doesn't mean it's not in Article 4 now. And I've seen people get caught out with this. So just make sure that you're refreshing the spaces and areas that you're looking at, because as city centres push out from the centre and become more popular, as the busyness moves out, then and the population moves out, you will find areas becoming into. So one strategy for a really good investment strategy is looking at an Article 4 area in a city and looking to see where there may be opportunities to pick up properties at a HMO and making them HMOs now before Article 4 potentially comes in the future. So that is a really good strategy. So back to the checklist on due diligence. When did it come into force? Is planning permission in place currently? And if it's not, then are you able to evidence a lawful use? And how long can you go back, and how much evidence can you actually get? And again, you'd want to get some guidance from the local authority that if you were going to apply for this, what type of evidence they would look for to support that application. Then you'd want to consider, is licensing separate and valid? Because again, with licensing, so planning permission stays with the property. So if I bought a property that already has planning permission in place, that permission would remain unless something else changed. However, with a license, it doesn't move over. So you, as a new owner to a property, you have to apply for a license. So again, you'd want to get guidance on whether any works would need to be done and whether you would get a license on that property. Understanding the local authority's attitude towards HMOs, specifically in various areas, will always be a good starting point, because they will be very open and honest with you around what they do and don't want in which areas, because they're trying to, especially if you're trying to make their jobs easier. How many HMOs already exist nearby, and has precedent been set? And just because precedent's been set, that still doesn't necessarily mean that local authorities will accept new applications in that area. And again, just because Article 4 is there and you have to go through planning, that doesn't mean that you won't get planning if you applied for it. And then from a valuation point of view is speaking to valuers who value properties in that location to get a good understanding on what they do, because they do it independently for lenders in various areas, different lenders, and they know the market, they know the area, and get in their opinion before you purchase the property. So finally, step 9 is just understanding your strategic considerations. So are you comfortable with the planning risk? And do you even know about it in the first place? If not, then I suggest you seek guidance from a planning consultant. Do you have time to wait for permission? And are you prepared to take on that risk? Does the finance allow for the delay? And is your exit dependent on HMO use? Whenever we look to invest, we like to have plan A, B, C, and D. You know, how many options have we got as an exit? And if, you know, you bought the property without subject to planning or without planning in place, and you were buying it on the basis that you were going to get planning permission and you don't, what other use classes can you do for it? You know, will it work as a C3 residential only? Will the value stack? Will the numbers stack? Is the demand for C3 in and amongst HMOs? Is there plenty of demand? So there's various things that you can look at within that when you start breaking it down. So look, hopefully that was a bit of consideration for you if you are interested in investing within HMO, currently investing in HMOs in Article 4 areas. And if that was helpful or not, if you've been stung by this in the past, then if you want to share your stories with us, we'd be more than happy to talk about them. But ultimately, the closing sentiment is that Article 4 isn't something to fear, just something to respect. It is what it is. Investors who succeed in HMO investing are the ones who understand planning, evidence lawful use, and align finance with planning risk. If you're looking at a HMO in an Article 4 area and you're unsure how planning may affect funding, speak to us before you commit. Planning risk and finance risk are closely linked, and it's far easier to assess early rather than to fix it later on. Thanks for listening. I'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. We hope you have learned something and have some tips to take away. We'd be very grateful if you enjoyed the show. You could give us a review and share with anyone that you know that may be interested. And of course, subscribe to the show so you can get notified when a new episode is released. If you'd like us to answer any questions or go deeper on a specific topic, please drop us a message at primeproperty.finance. See you on the next episode.